Hello! So today I'm going to be talking about The Ruins by Scott Smith, written in 2006. Scott Smith only wrote 2 novels in his career, A Simple Plan and this. Now I haven't read A Simple Plan, but I have seen the movie a very long time ago, but I do remember really enjoying it. Now it's been a while since I've read a straight up horror novel, so I was excited to give this one a go. In my early 20s, I was a massive horror fan. I think for about 3 years straight, I only read horror. I mean nothing but horror. I was on the hunt for the goriest, the most violent, the most disturbing books I could find. I don't quite know what was wrong with me, but I just couldn't get enough. I've always thought that horror and comedy are some of the hardest things to do in fiction writing, so at that time it was just a constant aim to find pieces of fiction that could really get under my skin. And just in case you're wondering, the scariest, or the book that got most under my skin, in fact it's buried in my subconscious and refuses to leave, even I think 15, 16 years later, is the novel House of Leaves. Now during those 3 years of the heavy horror binge, I did see this novel pop up a few times, but I don't know, it never really stood out to me at that time. Something about the cover or the setup, I don't know, I just never really got around to reading it. I would still say I am definitely a horror fan. I haven't reviewed much horror on this channel since I started it, but it is obviously a very new channel. But it did dip somewhat. I think I indulged too much in my early 20s and I became a little bit numb to it all. But I still keep up to date with the horror genre. I quite often look at top scariest books written in 2022, or top scariest books of the decade, or most horrific books of the decade, and that kind of stuff. I still watch that. If you've never checked out Criminoli's channel, he does lots and lots of reviews on horror stuff. His channel is growing and growing, but yeah, he is great. But over the past few years, this book keeps popping up on the most horrific books you could ever read lists. And I was in a charity shop and I saw it for 10p. If you're in the States, 10 cents. It very, pretty much giving it away. And I thought to myself, do you know what? I haven't read a straight up horror novel in a while. Let's give this a go. It's made all those lists. I'm excited. Now maybe I have a bit of an arrogance when it comes to horror because I searched so far and wide for 3 years reading everything I could get my hands on. But I can tell you right now that this book has no place on any list in the top 10 most horrific books you'll ever read in the English language kind of thing. It wouldn't even make my top 100, probably not even my top 200. So that kind of gives you an idea of how disappointed I was going into this when it did not meet my expectations. I found it very tame. So yeah, I was very disappointed. But let's put that all aside and talk about it because there might be something in here that you're interested in checking out. The themes within this novel cover isolation, survival, cultural imperialism, ish, and I mean ish, arrogance, human nature, power and control, loss of innocence, and sacrifice. Now, all those things probably make this novel sound like it is quite complex, but it really isn't. Those are just things that I could squeeze out of the book. I always try to look for themes within a piece of writing, and that's kind of what, if I was really trying, I could pull out of this. The book is set in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, so I am sorry. And we follow a group of American tourists who head out into the jungle to search for a lost friend, only to find themselves trapped and hunted by an ancient carnivorous plant. The book's main characters are the 4 Americans. We've got Eric, Jeff, Stacy and Amy, and they are on vacation in Cancun when they bump into a German man called Matthias, and it's his brother who has gone missing in the nearby jungle. Matthias and the 4 Americans also bump into a trio of Greeks whose names could be their real names or not their real names, and those names are escaping me right now, but all of them set off into the jungle in aid of helping Matthias find his brother. The deeper the group get into the jungle, the more they're met with hostility from the local Mayans, warning them almost not to go where they're going. But it's their arrogance and their need to kind of push on that they kind of ignore all of these warning signs and head out to the ruins and this kind of mound that's covered in these sort of vines to check it out. But once they are there, the Mayans won't let them leave. With guns and bows, they hold them back and they have to stay on the mound. And the rest of the novel is the group slowly coming to terms with the fact that this kind of plant, these vines, almost seem to have a mind of their own. They seem sentient and they are constantly taking their equipment away. They are slowly sort of feeding on them at night. Some of the vines are going inside them and sort of spreading across their bodies. The vines have learnt to mimic human voices, And what ensues is a general fight for survival. The group have limited water, limited food, and the power dynamics between the group is constantly shifting as they have to keep turning to more dire and more drastic measures for survival. Now, this book isn't without its horrific moments, and I would say that it definitely falls more into that horrific rather than scary genre. I know in the horror genre you can get books that are very scary, but very little gore or anything horrifying happens, and vice versa, you can have books that aren't that scary but are just kind of horrific and quite intense. Now, I'd love to talk to you about the complexity of character, but unfortunately, and I will cover this again in my dislikes, they're just so two-dimensional. It's nothing you haven't seen before. Everyone seems to fall into this kind of trope, this kind of role. What's hilarious is the book even self-referentially has a moment where the characters are talking about what would happen if this situation was turned into a movie and who would play who. And then you're reading that going, yeah, they would play that because that's actually how they're written. So there's no, I feel like the author was going for something a little bit more complex here, a bit self-referential about horror films and that kind of trope. But really, it just made me go, yeah, you're just taking a moment in this novel to discuss what you've already created. And it just didn't work for me. Now, I could go into more detail about the things that happen in this novel, individual moments, little scenes, events, characters who die, or the horrific things that happen to each of them, but it's nothing you haven't really read before. So to speed things up, let's just jump straight on to what I liked and what I disliked. What did I like? Not a lot, to be honest, but there are some things that I think horror fans will really appreciate in this book. So I'm going to go straight in with the writing style. The prose is really stripped back, and it suits the pacing of this book beautifully. It flows really, really well. It is delivered at a breakneck speed. And what this book does very well is introduce that growing sense of dread. I thought the pacing and the structure of it was actually quite excellent. Even though everything that was happening I'd read 1,000 times before, I can't fault it for its ability to slowly get under your skin, for that rising dread to just keep ratcheting up and up and up and up as things keep getting worse and worse and worse. I also feel like the actiony sequences or those horrific moments are brought to life in really sort of like sparse but dark, straight to the point detail. And as the novel builds, yeah, all that does kind of get under your skin. That's the only thing I liked about it, but it is quite important in a horror novel to capture that thing. And I think Scott Smith has done a pretty, well, I'd say an excellent job in that regard. So what didn't I like? Main thing for me, the characters. They were all archetypes of characters you've seen 100 times before. And it was just boring. They are so two-dimensional. There are attempts, little moments, little attempts to give some characters backstory, but it just doesn't go far enough. And I can understand why. I can understand why it doesn't, because it wants to keep ratcheting up the tension. But at the same time, what it's left you with is something where you just don't care. I didn't care about any of these characters at all. Not one bit. When they died, when bad things happened to them, I didn't care. And because I've read this 1,000 times before, I've seen these characters 1,000 times before, yeah, I was just so disappointed. I wanted to care for them. I wanted a bit more detail. I wanted these little breadcrumbs of their lives and their past lives to infect into the main narrative a little bit more, for me to actually feel something. And I really, really didn't. The characters, they were just awful. I can't tell you anything about them. One's training to be a doctor. One's gonna go teach. That's it. That's all I've got for you. I've got nothing else. It just, yeah, it doesn't go anywhere near deep enough for me to care in any way whatsoever. Another thing that I didn't like, and this is a petty one, so you can hate me for it, but it's just because of my dyslexic brain, I kind of struggle with books that are just dense text with no breaks. And this book is just, yeah, there are no breaks whatsoever. And I totally understand why horror novels do this. They do it so that they can keep ratcheting up the tension, so there is no break for the reader, that you are in the pacing, you are in the book with them, and you're feeling it build. I understand why it is used as a device, but for me, I just don't like it. I like those moments to sort of break and reflect, even in horror novels, I think you can still ratchet up the tension and have those moments of pause and break. And this, yeah, it's just pure dense text. And if you don't like that either, then yeah, it's not one for you. And my final dislike is not really the book's fault, but it's everyone on the internet's fault for saying that this is one of the most horrific, most kind of like jaw-dropping books you'll ever read. It really, really isn't. It's very tame. Very, very tame. Now, maybe in 2006 it was. Maybe in 2006 it was really kind of hard-hitting. However, I've read a lot of horror fiction that was written way, way before this that is way scarier, more horrific, and gets under your skin more. So I'm not too sure that's quite right. But, you know, there might be something that time has sort of damaged this a little bit. But yeah, it was just a bit tame. I was a bit like, if I'm going to sacrifice character, which is fine, if I'm going to sacrifice any kind of like layering or sort of plot development, that's fine, but make sure that the horrifying things that are happening are done in a way that really affects me. So at least you're succeeding in that regard. But this novel, it did not. It did not do that for me at all. And there you go. That's my thoughts and feelings, likes and dislikes on The Ruins by Scott Smith. As you can probably tell, I was not a fan of this one. A little bit disappointed. It's the first book I've read in 2023 that I've actively been like, yeah, I did not like that. I'm going to give it 1.5 stars out of 5. Possibly 2 stars, because I do think there are a couple of things, pacing and prose, that Scott Smith is doing extremely well in this as far as the horror genre is concerned. But other than that, it's got nothing else going on. It's utterly predictable and incredibly boring. I can't believe it. It's just boring. So I will still be on the hunt for horror that kind of really gets under my skin. But there you go. Have you read The Ruins by Scott Smith? Do you think I'm a nutcase for not finding it scary and horrific? Did you find it at all scary or horrifying? I'll be really interested to know, as yeah, I just didn't think it was. But yeah, if you have read it, if you liked it, if you didn't like it, please let me know in the comments below. And as always, hit the old subscribe and thumbs up if you enjoyed this in any way. And I'll see you all on the next one.